first thing we need to do is go ahead and create our password. So in this case, on this machine, we're going to go ahead and give it a pretty weak password, to be quite honest with you. In most of our classes in our labs, we don't use the most elite of passwords. We either use admin pass, all lowercase, or in this case, since this is Windows Server 2008 and we have the password restrictions pre-installed, we need to go ahead and create a little bit of a more secure password. So we're going to use admin pass 1. We're going to use the capital A and the number 1. So admin pass 1, the capital A at the beginning, and the number 1 at the end. Obviously an extremely weak password, just as admin pass was before it, but Microsoft is requiring us to have a little bit of a better password with the new version Windows 2008 and the password complexity requirements turned on, which is essentially 8 characters and then a combination of one of the 3 of the 4 of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. So that's really what it's requiring for us. So admin pass 1 gets it for us. It says your password's been changed and we're ready to log in. Now keep in mind the default user account in Windows is administrator. For Linux, it's root. So do keep that in mind if you're more of a Unix, Linux kind of background person. All right, now at this point, Microsoft presents us this initial configuration task. Now this is a nice window to have when you start up. Many times in an enterprise environment, a lot of these changes, if not all of these, are going to be preset, handed through group policy and scripts. But in this case, since we're just kind of doing a vanilla simple install, I want to walk you through a few of these options here so we can make sure we have everything set the way that we want it. So first of all, for Windows activation, I'm going to skip that for right now. I haven't entered in a product key. I'm not going to do that on this video, not necessary. First of all, though, let's go ahead and set our time zone. On a server, it is extremely important that we have accurate, up-to-date time. Now notice here, this is the timestamp it's delivering to us. One thing that you may want to check is see, first of all, what time zone we're on and set that as it is according. Now here where our location is, we're on Central Time, so I'm going to go ahead and change from Pacific Time, I think is what it was currently, and move over to Central Time for me. Another thing that we can do is we can look here and ensure this is correct, which we're just going to go ahead and say it is for now. We do want notification of clock changes. And then the other thing that we're going to do is make sure that we are set to synchronize on our time. We can change our servers if we need to. Sometimes people don't want to use Windows, they'll use NISTs, or they'll use even their own internal one, and that's fine. If your internet is currently working, you can hit update now, and it should work, and go ahead and update. Now let me go ahead and say this. It's important to have accurate time, because when we are working on debugging problems on a server, or we're working with maybe post-incident, maybe some kind of network compromise, something like that, it is vital that we have accurate, synced up times within a second or two. And the reason for this is if we're trying to correlate logs across multiple machines and routers and all these sorts of things, if we have even one machine that's off on its time skew, it can completely throw off our information. It can make it perhaps inadmissible in court. It can make it difficult to track down and actually see what's going on. It can simply make something not show up correctly in our logs. If we have some kind of intrusion detection based on logging and something is off on its time, it may not throw a flag. So it is critical with servers that we have up-to-date, accurate time. And so that's why I want to spend a lot of time here on this time zone setting. Now, configure networking. In this case, VMware has only delivered to me one network, but actually, just so you know, it is possible for VMware Fusion and most of the other virtualization platforms as well to deliver over to Windows more than one network card. Okay, and there are many cases where we do this. When I teach firewalling, we need at least 2 network connections on a Linux box. So there are many cases where we need more than one. But I just delivered one to it. We can change that if we need to. In another video in Linux, I'll show you how to do that when that's pertinent. Now let's go ahead and look at the properties here. So notice here we have IP6 and IP4 both installed. If you don't know the difference between the two, don't worry about it too much. Currently we're going to be using IP4. So I'm just going to go ahead and unselect IP6 so that none of my users may accidentally try to configure this. And then let's go to IP4 and hit Properties. Now notice, remember I had told you before that we're using a NATed connection and a shared internet connection, and this is the setting that VMware is giving to this virtual machine. So for that reason, I can go ahead and have an automatically assigned IP address. However, there are many cases on a server where we may want to use a statically assigned IP address. Now I know most of you at home, on desktops at work, DHCP with a dynamically assigned IP address as we have set here is a good way to go. However, on a server, there are many cases where we may want a manually, statically assigned IP. However, we're not going to do that. At this point, we're just going to go ahead and leave it automatic. But you may need to change this statically to what you need. Okay, so just wanted to mention that. All right, so everything is pretty much good to go as we have it. The only thing I did was deselect IP6, which is not critical at this point. And then what we need to do now is go ahead and give the machine a computer name. So in lab, all of our physical machines in our labs are already pre-labeled. And so I have my students just match the name with what's on the label of the actual physical computer. In this case, since we're virtualizing, maybe not as important. Okay, so here we have our computer name. And this was randomly assigned by our installation. So we probably want to change this to something different. And I always tease all my fellow IT guys because we are known as computer people for not being exactly the most creative people in the world. But one way that we do get pretty creative is coming up with computer names. We've had multiple naming mechanisms at my university. I'm not going to talk about what those are right now on this video. But let's go ahead and create one. Let's call him Frodo. Okay, so those of you that are any Lord of the Rings or Tolkien viewers, readers will know where this is coming from. So this machine is just going to be called Frodo. All right, so it says, all right, we can do this, but we've got to restart, hearkening all the way back to the Windows 95 days. And we say, yes, of course, I've been using Windows for a long, long time. I'm used to this whole restarting thing. And so essentially what we have to do in this case is, since we have changed the computer name by which it's referred to, we need to restart the machine. There are some changes that require a restart. So notice this was actually pretty quick. Now on a virtual machine, a lot of times on a physical machine, first of all, let me say it this way. Normally we have to press Control-Alt-Delete to log in. This is the signal that says, hey, a user is logging on. The problem with a virtual machine is that oftentimes a Control-Alt-Delete will not work because it's expecting that on the actual host machine. So if you press Control-Alt-Delete on your virtual machine and it doesn't do anything, don't panic. It's not because your keyboard isn't working. It's probably because the Control-Alt-Delete is being used usually for your host machine, not your virtual machine. So what you can do is you can go and look, and a lot of times you're going to see on your options on your virtual machine the ability to send a Control-Alt-Delete signal. So I'm going to take full screen off and I'm going to show this to you. All right, we should have this as an option as well. And I guess you can't see it on this video, but I'm going to go ahead and click the send Control-Alt-Delete signal, and it sent it now virtually, and now we're ready to log in. So here we are, logging in. Our desktop is good to go, and we can go ahead and assume everything is the same except our computer name got changed. Let's go ahead and confirm it. Notice here it shows that we don't even have to click because it says full computer name Frodo, and the work group is work group. Now we're going to leave this. We are going to promote this machine into a domain controller later, but at this point the work group option is just fine. Okay, some other things that you may want to check on, and I'm not going to spend any time on this right now on this machine in this lecture, but we may want to consider how we handle automatic updating, feedback. A lot of times for security purposes, we may be very careful on how we allow Microsoft to accept any of our data. Of course, it says, you know, this information collected is not used to identify or contact you or your company. We're not going to have a debate right now over the merits of that, but we have seen in the past plenty of companies, cough Google, that have in some cases said, hey, we're not really doing anything that's going to identify you, and later on from privacy advocacy groups we find out they do. So you can find out more about this later, but suffice to say, usually your own enterprise is going to have written authenticated documentation on how you handle this. So for now I'm just going to close this and not make any changes. And then we can also update our machine. Now let me say this, in a production environment it is critical that we update. And there are ways that we update. There are methods that we have to make updating easier and enforced and authenticated. But for us, we're going to also ignore this for now as well. Okay, we will come back to this later. And then now we have the ability to go ahead and do some things here. We can add roles. We can add features. We'll talk about what these roles and features are in a later lecture. But I can let you go ahead and look through some of these now and just see some of the options and availabilities that we can use to further customize our Windows Server. Because remember, at this point, here's Windows Server, right? Yay, rah, rah, rah. We've got our Windows Server, here it is. It can do some things, but really, honestly, right now, it's not doing much more than a desktop is doing until we add some roles and or features. So let me go ahead and show you some features. Here are some features, and basically there's a lot of new software additions that we can install to give us more control as well. So there is a difference between roles and features. We'll talk about those in another lecture as well. We can enable or disable remote desktop. I definitely prefer it being disabled at this point, although there are many cases where we want a Windows server to accept remote desktop, and we would control through group policy who can access it and from what times and from where they can access by remote desktop. And then also Windows Firewall. We'll go ahead and leave Firewall on, but at one point in our class we will need to turn the firewall off for some of the changes that we'll make, but generally speaking we want our Windows Firewall to be on. Okay, so at this point we've gone ahead, we've installed